Welcome to the PHAROS Fit podcast, where we help you to explore your capacity to move better, push further, and achieve your limitless potential through fitness, nutrition, recovery, and lifestyle. Hey guys, welcome back to the PHAROS Fit podcast. Great to be back with you guys again. Very excited about today's podcast because I'm here with Dr. Katherine Haker, my business partner, but also a doctor at Cedars in West Hollywood. West Hollywood, right?
It is West Hollywood.
And Kate has obviously been on the front line of this pandemic and the COVID situation since day one. Obviously seeing a lot of things firsthand from when the cases very first started happening to obviously the worst parts of the pandemic to the vaccine situation we're in now. So I'm really looking forward to kind of getting her perspective on this thing. And I want to start, Kate, with basically where are we right now with the pandemic, with the vaccine? What the hell's happening here?
Well, LA is doing really well all of a sudden over the last month.
Do you mean in terms of like
overall numbers, cases have fallen. I think LA County maxed out at about 15,000 cases a day. And yesterday we were at 1,260. So it's down by over 90% in 6 weeks. And the hospital admissions are reflecting that as well. I think Cedars topped out at about 280 patients in the hospital with COVID, and we're down around 30 now. So it looks like it's almost over, at least this round.
So what is the reason for that? Because it's obviously not the vaccine, or it can't just be the vaccine because relatively few people have received it. And now obviously the way that a coronavirus behaves, as I understand it, is that, it does operate in these kind of waves. It's an initial spike and then it goes down and it always goes back up in the wintertime, Christmas time, and then it always comes back down again. How much of this is the way that the coronavirus behaves and how much of it has been like the action we've taken?
I don't think anybody knows. I think it's been surprising to most people how rapidly it's come down, and it's probably, obviously people have been encouraged to be more responsible about their behavior. I think there was the big spike that we saw was after Thanksgiving, and people were probably being a little lax about social distancing and masking and whatnot. But also vulnerable populations in California have largely been vaccinated now, the elderly and the healthcare community, which isn't tracked in terms of its exposure or its risk to the general public, but I think it was probably a lot greater than reported. A lot of people, were probably getting sick in healthcare facilities from other patients or from healthcare workers. And so once healthcare workers were vaccinated, the numbers really started coming down.
Right. That's interesting. And to date in LA, which vaccine's going out? Both vaccines are going out now?
There's the Pfizer and the Moderna. They're very similar. The Pfizer is a little harder to deal with. It has to be kept at very cold temperatures. So basically, major institutions like Cedars, UCLA, Kaiser, the facilities that have the ability to store it have been getting primarily the Pfizer vaccine, and the sort of public access sites like Dodger Stadium and Disneyland have been using the Moderna vaccine because it's just a little less tweaky.
Now, we've been hearing that at the end of the day, like a lot of vaccines are being thrown out because they can't be used, which is obviously hugely frustrating. Is that just the Pfizer one because of the temperature thing, or is that both of them? Or
I think that happened rarely. It wasn't a lot of vaccines. I think there's one case of 15 vaccines that were discarded out of hundreds of thousands that California has received. I think they're being a lot more careful about not thawing them out. They generally process them in batches of 10 and just not over processing. I think the sites had initially expected people to show up more than they did. People signed up for vaccinations and didn't show. And so I think, that's not really happening so much anymore.
But in general, why do you think the vaccination process in LA has been so slow and disorganized, compared to the rest of the planet, it seems?
I think California in general has a public, issues with organization of its public health. Part of that is just the nature of California and how rapidly it's grown. Part of it is the population here. There are a lot of people who are, come to California, a lot of immigrants coming in, a lot of sort of undocumented people. It's hard for government officials to really even know who is in the state.
But they have to take some accountability here.
Yeah, I think the thing that bothers me most about the disorganization of all states, but California in particular, is that these vaccines went into phase 3 trials in the early summer, really in July, and everybody knew they were coming, and they did nothing to prepare.
Right.
The state really should have had a database, had everybody registered, knew who was going first, had made all those decisions ahead of time. Right. So they were ready to roll it out, and they really just didn't.
That is so frustrating, as a small business to hear, because we are being we are being kept closed on the premise that, well, when everyone gets vaccinated, everything's going to be okay. And then if you're then not being organized enough to get these vaccines out quickly, then, effectively you are, destroying a lot of small businesses because you weren't organized enough to get the vaccine out.
Yeah.
So, I think it's particularly hard for a lot of people who are in, who have small businesses. A number of restaurants around us are now gone forever, and I know a bunch of gyms that have gone out, and I'm sure a ton of small business at this point. It's been a year. It's been a year.
Yeah, well, the other thing to remember too is kids have been out of school for a year,
right.
And educators will tell you that over the summertime, kids lose about 25% of what they learned during the school year.
Right.
And kids have now been out for a whole year, and there are a lot of kids who have literally been out; they haven't logged on at all. And so when they go back to school, they're really going to be 2 years behind.
Oh my God!
And it's just it's really sad. It's
really sad.
It's the long-term, ramifications of losing 2 years of your education are going to be pretty significant for those kids.
And at what point do you think once the teachers get vaccinated, the schools will reopen, or what's the
teachers are holding out. They want to be vaccinated before they go back, even though the public health guidelines don't, recommend that they do that, and that the schools are relatively safe. And schools in a lot of states have opened, and a lot of private schools are opened, and they're not really having any problem. But it's a problem with the fact that the school districts and the government has to negotiate with the teachers union, and the teachers union just isn't going to budge on that. And the reality is now, even if they were going to start vaccinating teachers tomorrow, it would take a month probably to get them all vaccinated, and that's a good 5 weeks before you develop adequate immunity after you're vaccinated. And by that point, it's basically the end of the school year. So if they really are going to hold out for, not go back until they're vaccinated, then the school year is basically over.
Right. And how much of that do you think is, the teachers are afraid to go back to work because of the fear that's kind of been put in them throughout this whole process? I mean, how valid are their concerns about going back to work? I mean, is it?
Well, they're as valid as anybody else's concerns about going back to work. So
Right.
It's just an issue of what really is considered an essential employee. Every clerk in a grocery store is expected to be at work,
Right.
In a hospital, every transporter has to be there. They're making minimum wage. They're essential workers. They have to go to work. And somehow the teachers think that doesn't apply to them.
It's crazy that whole kind of like, it's fine for this person to go to work, but I shouldn't have to kind of like
Right.
thinking of this whole thing. It really is very, very strange. So based on, everything right now, based on what you're seeing at the hospital, and the decline in numbers that you're seeing, when do you think, for example, PHAROS Athletic Club will be able to open again? What's your...
Well, it's still that tier system in California.
Which is nonsense, but yeah.
It's nonsense because it's very extreme. The numbers have to be very, very low. But I think the number is, if we get down below 7 cases per 100,000 people in Los Angeles County per day, we can open at 25%, and we're currently at 12. So we don't have that much farther to go before we can reopen at 25% capacity. And for us, that's okay because we're such a big facility.
Because we have a big building, yeah.
Yeah, for restaurants, that's another issue.
Right, because the margins, this is, I'm sure everyone does understand this, but the margins are so small when you have a small business that particularly in restaurants, the margins are so small, and to only be able to operate at 25% is hugely damaging to a business like that. Like I said, luckily we have a big facility and we are a class-based gym. So it's not like a kind of like Globo gym where you have 500 people in the gym at the same time kind of deal. It's like we can be very careful about like how many people we have in the building and still run a very...
And spacing and social distancing.
Exactly.
Doing all
we can
the right
run a very
things.
safe and successful operation. And with that in mind, Kate, how do you think things are going to change when we reopen? Because remember, before we were shut down, we had a very kind of safe operation with the way that we were checking people in, and the sanitization, the cleaning protocols we had, and the UV cleaning, and the social distancing, and all that kind of stuff. Do you think it's going to go back to that, or is it going to be different? Or
well, it's certainly going to go back to that until everybody has an opportunity to be vaccinated, and the chances are for younger people, most of our client base are not going to be offered vaccines until June or July. So at least until then, for the majority of our classes, we're going to have to go back to that same, the same protocols we were using before we moved outdoors. With the caveat that there are a lot of people in the gym who have been vaccinated, and we may be able to offer classes for people who have been vaccinated that are more sort of our normal, less strict protocol.
You remember when before we got shut down, in the original guidelines, for gyms, with respect to training at high intensity and how hard that can be, and the dangers of obviously training at high intensity whilst wearing a mask, that kind of thing. And we had, our 8-foot square boxes, and once everyone was inside their box, they were free to take their mask off. The gym's big and it's ventilated, that kind of thing. Why was that all of a sudden, not okay? And at what point is that going to be okay again? And
that's a really good question. I think at the time there was less data available about what was actually going on in gyms. And so, the fear was that, indoor activities were dangerous. And so we needed to move outdoors. And all indoor facilities were kind of lumped together, whether it was a gym, a hairdresser, right, bar, whatever it is. And so we were all forced outside. I think that, there's a fair amount of data now. They've looked at gyms in particular that are strict about social distancing protocols and cleanliness protocols and such. And there's a very low incidence of transmission in gyms that are following the rules.
Yeah, we were looking at this thing from IHRSA yesterday that IHRSA came out with. I'm just going to pull it up real quick, because this was a study that was done recently on assessing the risk basically in gyms. And the infection rate in gyms is 0.0023%. That's assessing 49.4 million member check-ins over the last 3 months, which obviously is a huge amount of people and an incredibly low infection rate. At the same time, 1 in 5 Americans now experience mental health issues. And we are at 40% higher risk of developing cardiovascular and metabolic diseases than the general population. And only 23% of adults are hitting the federal physical activity guidelines for adults, according to the CDC. So we've got this really strange dilemma where it's like, you're not allowed to go to the gym because it's not safe, but not going to the gym is now causing all these other problems, when the truth of how risky training in a gym is extreme. Like, the dangers are extremely low statistically. So the fact that we are still closed, knowing this information, obviously is hugely frustrating, because our goal and our mission obviously is to get people metabolically healthy, to be the gift of health and fitness. That is our purpose. And
I think government recognizes that, and they know that gyms aren't specifically an issue, but what they've basically said is it's not specifically one industry or another that's causing the problem. It's just that we want to keep people at home. So any excuse people have to go out of the house, we're just going to try to take that away.
Which is just bananas at this point.
It kind of is, yes. I mean, particularly since the overwhelming majority of people are getting sick at home.
Yeah.
I have a friend at work who just recently lost 2 first-degree relatives to COVID because of a family reunion that they had over the holidays indoors.
Yeah. Because
they're not allowed to go anywhere else, and had they been allowed to meet in a park or in a restaurant that was taking appropriate precautions, they honestly would probably have been safer.
Yeah, I think this has been an ongoing trend and an ongoing problem. It's like, once you stop allowing people to do anything like outside the homes, of course, the natural tendency is just to invite everybody to their home. So now inside becomes,
and you're hanging out in the kitchen.
Yep. And you're hanging out in the kitchen, yep. And grandma and granddad are there, and aunties and uncles are there. Big families are there getting together, and of course for multiple hours. I think statistically, the longer you are in that confined area, not having any kind of social distance really, and probably low ceilings and low ventilation, of course, the risk goes up and up and up. But that's been the message. And yes, I know they've been saying avoid large family gatherings and Thanksgiving and Christmas and that kind of thing. But when you don't allow people to go out, people are going to naturally do that, because what do you want people to do? Just be alone all the time in their house? Like, can't expect people to do that.
It's possible to contract COVID just passing somebody in a hallway, but the reality is the majority of people who catch COVID from another person are face to face with them, unmasked for at least 15 minutes. So if you avoid that, like obviously in the gym we're not in each other's face for 15 minutes. When we were doing the social distancing protocols, everybody was spaced 10 feet apart, or they were masked. And so if you go back to that kind of thing, it should be pretty safe.
And so do you think, in your medical opinion, do you think gyms are safe to train in?
Yeah, I'd train here. I would train here indoors. I feel perfectly safe doing it.
And do you think, and again, we have kind of like the privilege of being a larger facility and not being a big chain commercial gym, so we can control the flux somewhat. Do you think those gyms are going to have more of a problem, the ones that are like bigger chain gyms that have like a bigger flow, or do you think at this point it doesn't really make any difference?
They obviously have more cleanliness issues because they can't clean, make sure that their equipment is cleaned after every use like we basically do. But the reality is that once everyone over really the age of 55 has been offered a vaccine, and everyone with pre-existing conditions, if you have a respiratory illness, if you have an autoimmune disease, if you're on an immunosuppressant medication for any reason, and once those people have been vaccinated, and you're talking about the younger people who really aren't at risk, personal risk from getting COVID, they're really, the risk is that they transmit it to a vulnerable person. Once those vulnerable people have been vaccinated, there isn't going to be a whole lot of reason to keep.
There's no reason, right? Yeah.
To keep the lockdowns going.
Statistically, and of course there are always outliers, but statistically, the amount of like younger people that get very sick from COVID are a lot lower. What do you think about? Obviously, there's a lot of talk now about different strains of the virus coming in, and whether or not these vaccines are going to be successful for those new strains. What's the truth there?
I think the press is being very irresponsible about the way they report it. Vaccines, viruses mutate all the time, and the mutation rate is going to increase as more of the world population becomes exposed to COVID, just because it's multiplying faster. It's going to get a lot worse worldwide before it gets better because obviously it's only a handful of countries right now that are vaccinating their populations. There's a long way to go before the world is vaccinated, and all those strains will make it back here. The reality of the vaccines, though, is that what the vaccine really does is induce your body to create a piece of that spike protein that we all see pictures of on the surface of the coronavirus.
Yeah.
And then our bodies recognize that as foreign and mount an immune response to that little piece of foreign protein. And there are many antigenic sites on that little piece of protein. We don't mount a monoclonal antibody response. We mount a polyclonal antibody response. We make very many different antibodies to that piece of spike protein. And on top of that, we develop something called a T-cell response, cellular immunity, which is longer-term immunity as well. And yes, there will be mutations that change one of, or two or three of those antigenic sites, and some of the antibodies that we produce will no longer work, but there are many others. Okay. And it is theoretically possible that a mutation may change the configuration of the spike protein enough to render the whole thing, the whole vaccine ineffectual, but it's highly unlikely. So what's going to happen for the next several years is there'll be booster shots that will, account for the fact that, these mutations that happened and give you a newer version of the spike protein, and you'll mount new antibodies to it. And so I would expect that for the next several years, there'll be booster shots.
Flu jab, that you have to get the flu jab is that a different thing, or is that very similar?
It's similar. Right. The flu changes every year as well. And basically what happens with the flu is they look at, Australia is roughly 6 months ahead of us. It's winter there when it's summer here. And so they look at the flu strains that were going around Australia in April, and that's what they vaccinate us against in September, and then sort of vice versa.
What do you think about, so New Zealand, I know, dealt with it, very, very quickly and very effectively, as in they were able to lock it down, they stopped letting people into the country, and people were quarantined very quickly if they did go into the country. And of course, the cases just basically went away. But in the end, the virus will get there. Like, you can't lock a country down forever. And now I heard, in the news yesterday that there were some cases coming up there. And of course, the virus will spread because the virus is going to do what a virus is going to do. I'm not sure where they are in the vaccination process, but eventually, like you were saying, everybody's going to have to get vaccinated at some point because the virus will eventually get there. I'm not sure what the situation in Australia is in terms of vaccinations.
Similar. Right. They've managed to control it by basically locking down the country.
But the virus is still going to get there. Have they started vaccinating people?
I have
there?
No idea where they are.
That's going to be
but you can't travel to Australia right now.
Yeah.
So.
But eventually people will.
We'll see. I think their intent is to keep it pretty much locked down until their population is vaccinated. And there's small enough countries to do that.
That's what I mean. But yeah, I guess it's like how quickly they can get everybody vaccinated before. I mean, I know clients that have, I have clients that have gone there on business, and they have a very strict, obviously, quarantine and testing process. But, it's wrong to think that, the virus is just going to go away because there are no cases. The virus will eventually get there because, like I said, a virus is going to do what a virus is going to do. So the vaccination is going to have to happen at some point. So I just hope they kind of.
And these companies are dramatically ramping up their vaccine production.
exponentially, right?
Yeah, and at the same time, they're subcontracting with other drug manufacturers to produce it, and at the same time they're ramping up, for booster shots as well.
Because I know in the UK, because I know my parents are going through this, they have like 3 months between vaccinations because they say that after the first dose you're already 70% vaccinated, or 65 or 75. And then they're waiting for the next one. And the idea is that you try and get everybody the first one so that everybody's 75%, which seems to be smart to some degree.
That's what will happen here with the Pfizer, AstraZeneca. Probably the Pfizer one will be approved here. It's less efficacious it's a one-dose shot.
Pfizer's already been.
Oh, not the Pfizer. I'm sorry. Johnson & Johnson one.
The Johnson & Johnson. But that's a one shot.
Right now it's being, administered as a one-shot vaccine, but it's as a one-shot vaccine. It's basically as efficacious as one dose of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine.
Do you ever, this is a little conspiratorial, obviously, but, a lot of these drug companies have had, a history of somewhat irresponsible behavior, let's say. Have you ever had any kind of hesitation or concern over the vaccines or anything like that, or not really?
Yeah, these vaccines are different in that they're actually giving you a synthesized version of genetic material. The Pfizer and the current ones, the Pfizer and Moderna, are a little bit of messenger RNA that basically codes for protein. The AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson are actually giving you a piece of DNA that codes for the messenger RNA that codes for the protein. And the idea of that is you get a bigger bang for your buck because every strand of DNA will produce multiple strands of messenger RNA, and every strand of messenger RNA will produce multiple strands of protein. You just get sort of an amplified effect. But it is kind of weird to think that you're injecting genetic material into your body.
It is.
I did some research about it because it kind of freaked me out before I had the shot, and there's no way for your body to replicate this synthetic fragment of DNA because it really isn't a chromosome. It's just a little fragment, and it doesn't, it basically lasts in your body for about 48 hours. So, and same thing with the messenger RNA. When they inject it, basically it's gone in 48 hours. All the spike protein you're going to make is made in 48 hours, and after that it's just the matter of your immune system mounting response to that foreign protein.
So have you, at the hospital, have you seen any bad reactions to the vaccine, any of the vaccines?
People get sick. I got very sick with the second vaccine. It felt like the flu. It felt like, I was just sort of down for a day, mostly just body aches, fever, chills. I think I got the shot at around 9:00 in the morning, and around midnight that night I just started to feel terrible. I woke up, I couldn't sleep, everything hurt, and just really fatigued and tired. But by mid-afternoon the next day I was pretty much back to normal. It was short-lived, but it was kind of intense. I was surprised.
But you haven't had at the hospital any major issues, major problems?
No, but I'd say 1 in 10 people have a reaction like mine. They just get sick for a day.
And there's no GPS tracking system in the vaccine? Can you confirm that for me?
Little microchip.
So again, back to the same question. You think we will open at 25%? If you were to put a date on it, would you say March? Would you say
middle of March, late March, another month? I would guess.
You heard it here first, guys. Middle of March. Because right now, obviously, we are still operating outside for our classes, and it has. It's been a blessing for us how receptive to our community has been, and how hardworking, and how willing they've been to just adapt and to support us. But at the same time, we are a company that is trying to operate at a very high standard, and trying to provide our members with the quality of service that they would expect for the price that they're paying. And it's getting to the point now where, we really want to provide a better product and a better service before, because everyone has goodwill, and everyone, like I said, has been very supportive, but it will get to a point where people are like, you know what, I just can't do this.
Well, it's monotonous.
It's monotonous. It does get tiring after a while. So, I feel we are really just at the stage now where we are ready, and we have to just move back inside.
It's very frustrating. We have 22,000 square feet of
it's so frustrating.
Glorious facility and great equipment, and we can't use any of it.
Yeah.
Wonderful trainers who are just sitting at home waiting for.
It's a little crazy. So I hope you're right. I'm hoping March and April are going to be
at 25%.
At 25%, but again, I think that will actually be okay for us, especially if we go back to the same protocols we had before with the 8 foot square boxes and that kind of stuff, and just keeping everybody socially distanced and that kind of thing. And I people feel safe. I just wonder, do you think after this year there are going to be people that have been filled with so much fear that they're just not going to be?
Oh, and undoubtedly. And there are a lot of people that are refusing the vaccine, and a surprising number of healthcare workers are refusing the vaccine, some of the people that I work with. And it's shocking when we know so many people who've gotten sick and died from COVID that people would still refuse it. But people are refusing it. And right now the statistics are that roughly a third of adult Americans are saying that they don't want to be vaccinated, and roughly 20% of healthcare workers.
Are they, for the healthcare workers, is that because I mean, presumably they're not anti-vaxxers, they're just like, we just don't trust this vaccine? Or... Some
of them are anti-vaxxers, some of them, I think their attitude is, I'm young and this is new and I'm going to wait and see what, if there are sort of long-term negative consequences of vaccination.
And are there any conditions at the hospital where if you don't get it, you're not allowed to come back to work, or is
not yet, because it's so new. I don't think they want to sort of force it on people, but we're required to get a flu shot every year. So I would imagine that by next year, we're probably going to be obligated to be vaccinated for COVID as well. I mean, it doesn't make sense to be vaccinated for the flu and not for COVID. So
100%.
That's coming. They just haven't done it yet.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, that's just 20% of healthcare workers. It's going to be interesting to see how that statistic looks, across the globe, how many people are just going to say no.
Well, and what's going to be required that you have it, are you going to have it to fly?
Right.
Are you going to have it to go to a concert or a football game? Are you going to have it to go to a restaurant? Nobody really knows.
Bizarre. I mean, it feels so strange, but I guess, like you've told me before, when you go to certain countries, you have to get certain jabs, anyway. So I guess in terms of that perspective, it doesn't seem like a huge leap. But again, I guess it's because it's just so new and so quick and
and very different. It's a very different vaccine.
And it's just been such a crazy year of fear and disbelief and trust. I think there's a lot of trust issues now, and rightly so.
Yeah, because
we've been lied to a bunch of times.
Yeah, lied to.
It feels like we've been lied to a bunch of times.
Misled by government authorities.
Let's say the government has misled us.
They don't lie. They mislead us
to some degree. I'm sure by accident. But it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out and how many people are just going to be resistant to it.
It's also going to be interesting to see how it pans out politically, because obviously California is losing population, businesses are closing, people are leaving the state. There's a recall on of the governor, which is in large part because of his handling of COVID. And so that part of it is interesting as well.
It is. And I tell you, being in LA right now and seeing what's happening, to the social fabric here, and seeing, the growth of the homeless population and the increasing loss of jobs, and obviously businesses are being put out of business, which is creating more, economic hardship, / mental health issues / homelessness. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. And yet, the city and the government seem to work in the opposite direction. They're just creating more and more of this problem. And of course, the solution is to create better housing. But how much better housing can you create? You just keep creating better housing whilst the population grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. More and more people become reliant on the state because they can't help themselves anymore. They've got no jobs. They can't support themselves. It's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So, I'm not surprised at all that Newsom's being recalled, and I'll be surprised if something similar doesn't happen to Garcetti soon, to be honest. I mean, how long can this go on for in this? Because I'm kind of new to this city, relatively, but didn't Garcetti get in on the premise of he was going to help the homeless situation and make it better?
Yes.
But it's got exponentially worse in the time.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you can't blame COVID. I mean, that's not his fault, but this is just whole situation's been handled so poorly.
You can't do $1 trillion in GDP during a pandemic and still have this problem.
Exactly.
You still can't make that much money and just not have the government work to how it's supposed to work. There's something wrong.
There's something very, very wrong.
And I think from a healthcare perspective, that's so discouraging about all this is how much of it is political and how much COVID has been politicized by, people on all sides of the political spectrum, but it's not helpful.
No, because healthcare workers are there to make people healthy. That's why, you're passionate about getting people healthy, right? That's why you're there. That's why you do what you do. But like you said, the whole thing has been so politicized that it creates a whole different thing whole different animal. It's just
and it makes people distrustful of what the government is saying.
Very distrustful. Yeah, people just don't believe government anymore, or believe I always have to put leadership these days in quotation marks, because there is no leadership. There's no leading from the front from these people. There really isn't. I mean, when you study like Native American culture and history, and you read that leaders were elevated because they were the best among us. When you put that phrase, the best among us, on the leaders that we see, in whether on a local level or on a state level or a government level, it's kind of laughable. These people are the best among us. It's just like, oh my God.
In the statement that came out a couple of weeks ago, where we have this tier system based on a bunch of statistics kept by the state, and they're not going to release the data of how they calculate the
because you're not smart enough to understand it.
You're not smart enough to understand it, and they actually come out and say that, and then they wonder why there's a recall.
Right, exactly. It's just mind blowing. Well, Kate, thank you so much for that information. I think that's going to be really helpful for a lot of people. We hope you guys are ready to come back to the gym. Obviously, we totally understand if you're not. It's a personal choice at this point. But we are going to do everything we can to keep you guys safe and feel safe, and get you guys fit and healthy and strong, which is of course our mission. And of course, I'll be consulting with Kate throughout this whole process, and getting her her valuable opinion on how we should be doing things in order to keep keep the gym and keep our community safe. And that's what we will do. But yeah, we hope you are ready, and we hope 2021 is going to eventually come back to some sense of normalcy. But from what Kate's been saying, there is cause for hope. I think there is light on the horizon, at least in terms of the vaccinations, and then the numbers in California coming down at a very rapid rate. So it sounds as if there is certainly cause for hope. Right, Kate?
I think so.
Well, I hope we convinced you. All right, guys, that is it for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you so much, Kate, for joining us. Your information and knowledge on this stuff is invaluable to us. And we will see you soon, guys. Take care out there.